My name is Matthew Martin. I'm a senior lecturer in English here at St. Mary's University College. I teach English literature on a Bachelor of Education degree for people who are training to be teachers, and I also teach English on our liberal arts degree. I'm also involved in communication skills, that is the teaching of writing and communication to liberal arts students. And for years I was involved in setting up writing centers at other institutions in higher education. And just recently I'm getting involved in setting up writing centers at the secondary and even the primary level. All that work with writing centers was very specifically focused on interpersonal dynamics. We train peer tutors to work with other students, and it's all about two people sitting down in a room together and working face to face. All through the time we set up those programs, people were asking us, but what about your online provision? How can this be done online? And we were, for a lot of pedagogical reasons, very clear that no, we don't go about it that way, as it may seem very old school, but we want two people in a room together face to face. And I think we made that argument successfully, and there are a lot of centers operating now on that basis to kind of reflect the success of that. But I've since turned my attention to the online environment, thinking that there are ways to supplement what we do. Things have moved on in virtual learning so dramatically that there's a lot more flexibility and a lot more ways to use that. So that's what I did about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Started thinking about how could that online environment supplement what we do in the face-to-face environment, and blended learning seemed to be the answer, and I'm convinced now it is the answer. I decided that blended learning had some solutions for what we wanted to do, both in terms of saving time, supporting students. We are very involved in widening access here at St. Mary's. We have students who maybe have come through a non-traditional route, maybe don't have all the basic skills that we might have expected of students years ago, and we want to have support available to them when they need it, and the online environment seems a great way to do that. So I started thinking about blended learning, and I started stumbling in my own way to find out what resources were there. Doing research, I got in touch with people in America and found out what they were doing, and you could say I wasted a lot of time trying different online learning strategies, which in some cases I discovered didn't work. And that's one of the things I'm keen to help other lecturers with at the minute, is to say, look, some of these things work for certain contexts and some don't. And I hope I can save other people some time, because, for example, I spent a lot of time setting up recording videos for certain purposes, only to have my students say, you know, we didn't really like the video format. We prefer the information in other formats. And I think, well, okay, I've learned my lesson there. Sometimes video is great, sometimes it's not, it depends. So I stumbled for a year, and it was only then that I found out about this pilot project, which really helped me kind of put a structure on what I was doing, but also introduced even more avenues and more strategies that I was unaware of. So, and again, some of which work, some of which don't, but it's been very eye-opening, and I'm a lot further down the road than I was a year ago. People ask, you know, what are the benefits of blended learning? And I find it hard not to become a bit evangelical about it, because I look back at my life pre-blended learning, and I really wonder, you know, how did I live in the dark for so long? It does so many things, not only for the students, but for me as a teacher as well. It's hard to know where to begin. First off, and this I didn't expect, to set up my teaching, to reconfigure my teaching for a blended learning environment is one of the best professional development exercises I've ever engaged in. It forces you to rethink not just how you teach, but why you teach. Even what do you teach? When you start to think about what kind of information is suitable to put online, and what do you want to keep in the interpersonal environment, the lecture hall, the classroom, you really start wondering about the nature of the conversation you're having with your students, and you think, well, you know, some of this stuff is about transfer of knowledge, and some of this is about cultivating a certain way of thinking. And you really have to go through all the material and rethink what you're doing. So I've restructured my course considerably, both in terms of content and timing and texts and resources. So that's the first thing. It really was a good professional development exercise. Secondly, students really took to it. I mean, they are, as you know, the phrase digital native certainly applies. They have absolutely no bother accessing information this way. They really like the fact that they can return to the materials whenever it suits them. One student, I was getting feedback on what they thought of this kind of blended learning approach, and one student wrote, "It's like getting 2 classes for the price of 1." They really felt that they view my lectures online, they review those lectures, they have to prepare their readings for class, and all that happens before they even get to class. So in the old days, when they would show up a blank slate and wait to hear me lecture, they now show up prepared, they know the texts well. I quiz them on the text. It's very clear they have to be completely prepared before they come. I mean, that used to be a problem. You had students showing up who maybe hadn't done the reading. They thought, well, I'll just come and get the notes. Now they show up prepared, and they know that in class they have to be actively engaged. They have to work in groups. They're going to have to be a team. It's changed the dynamic completely. I think the downside of blended learning or using virtual learning that lecturers often talk about is it's very time-consuming to prepare. And I think that's what put me off for years, was that sense that this was going to eat up a lot of my time. But I remember I was at a conference with a professor from England, and we were talking about teaching and so forth. And in all our chats about teaching, I didn't realize that he did a lot of his teaching in a blended learning way or online way. We're just chatting away, and much to my surprise, he said, "Oh yeah, I've been doing this for years." And I said, "All right." And he said, it really struck me, the thing he said that he liked best about it was, he said, "Yeah, I find it so great in terms of managing my time." I remember thinking, do you not mean in terms of consuming all your time? I mean, I had this image of myself up at 2 in the morning checking discussion groups and having to give feedback, and he said, no, he said the great thing about it is I'm now in control of my schedule. He says I can control when I contact them, I can control, it's very flexible. That really opened my eyes, and I thought, all right, I'm going to investigate this further, because I think I've been put off by the thought that it was just going to be hugely time-consuming. Now, the fact is, it is very time-consuming when you set it up, no doubt about that, but then once you set it up, it's not there forever, because you have to keep editing and changing what you do, but it's, everything I've set up is there, and I don't have to keep recreating that material over and over, whereas I used to have to keep giving the same lecture over and over. Getting involved with this pilot project involved trying out a lot of different avenues and different strategies, different bits of software. I've done so many different things it would be hard to make a complete list, but I'll just go through some of the highlights. I spent a lot of time figuring out how to put lectures online, trying to decide, should it be a video format, should it be a PowerPoint, should it be what? Tried a lot of different things. In the end, what my students preferred was a PowerPoint with an audio track. They can navigate that, go back and forth through things. But as part of this pilot, I was then encouraged to use an add-on to PowerPoint, which is called Articulate, which increases the interactivity for students. They can now be quizzed, they can respond to things. It's nicer in terms of its presentation. So I'll be rolling that out in the coming year and seeing how students react to that. Another development that worked very well, was a big surprise, was the use of in-class phone voting, encouraging students to bring their personal devices to class. That's been absolutely transformative in ways I didn't expect. I thought I was just setting up a phone voting thing to get kids who don't want to talk in class to contribute and engage with questions. I did, that worked. But the devices all stayed out during class, and we started using them for doing research in class. The whole responsibility for finding the knowledge moved away from me. It became more their kind of activity, so that was absolutely transformative. I've also gone down the path of investigating wikis and setting up wikis and trying to find a way to use wikis that will be kind of user-friendly for students who, again, might be shy, might be wary of putting their views out there for everyone to read. So I've set up wikis in a way that people can work in small groups and then move on to larger groups, and I'll be rolling that out in the coming year and see how students respond to that. Screencasting is another thing. I've been able to, students who maybe aren't familiar with how to navigate the online resources that are out there, the library. There are a lot of things about using library resources that you have to kind of be in the know, and it's very hard to find the time to take 30 students or 100 students through all those details. They're just up there. I've taken them through the screencast now. It's available for them. We're also using Fronter as our virtual learning environment, which is good for the people who are trained to be teachers, because that's the virtual learning environment that's been rolled out to all the schools across Northern Ireland, so it's been kind of dovetailing with that. And the list goes on. I mean, there's a list of things that I tried that didn't really work, and but I think would work for other lecturers in different subjects. So, but those are the highlights. The blended learning, or flipped classroom as I'm calling it, I've been working with some people in the States who are involved in flipping the classroom and kind of drawing on their experience. One of the things that it has pushed forward for me is assessment. Finding out how students are performing. I know a lot more now about what my students are up to than I would have in the past, in a couple of different ways. One, as I said, because they view the lectures before class, and because they're told, look, you have to know this text, you have to view the lecture, all that has to happen before you come to class, I'm in the position now where I can say, I'm going to quiz you, first 10 minutes in class, you're going to have a quiz. At the minute, I actually use pen and paper for that, but we may put that on the phone in future as well so that they can be logged that way. But they show up for class and they are basically assessed there and then on what they know before the lecture has even begun. That's done a couple of things. I've always threatened in the past when students were showing up unprepared to say, well, look, I could start having reading quizzes or whatever. And students often said to me, we think that would be a good idea, but they often say that at the end of the year, once the year's passed. You know, in other words, you should incorporate that for next year's students. I think they'd appreciate that. So everybody in theory thought this was a good idea, but now that I'm doing it, my students actually have said to me, we really like the reading quizzes, because, you know, they've got a lot of work to do, and this helps structure their, it disciplines their preparation. So they're not going into the final exam suddenly have to cram everything in. You know, they don't all pass every reading quiz, and there's some flexibility. They're allowed to fail one and throw that mark away. But they've actually said, look, we really appreciate that, and it means I'm getting regular feedback or a regular sense of what they know and what they don't know and how they're going about it. So it's really improved the communication, kind of the assessment for learning in that respect. The other way I'm keeping tabs on them is when the lecture appears online, it is accompanied by a discussion forum so that it's right side by side, so they can view the lecture and then immediately I'm asking them some question and they can talk amongst themselves. And it's not a discussion that I have to kind of keep constant tabs on, but I can dip into that and see what are people talking about, other problems. And that is another kind of avenue for finding out what they're up to that I wouldn't have had in the past. And then what I'm moving into now is with this new version of PowerPoint with Articulate, where there will be online quizzes, I'll be able to get their answers to questions routed directly to me through our virtual learning environment. And that'll give me another way of keeping tabs on them. So it's really maximize the amount of conversation, and it's a form of assessment. Some of it is actually marked and assessed. In other words, those reading quizzes count. But the discussion forums and so forth, that's really maximized the amount that I can overhear as to what's going on inside their heads. One question I was asked recently, I was at an event where someone was asking about this online learning and blended learning and flipping the classroom, and I thought it was an interesting question. They said, we always associate this type of learning as being really useful for people in fields other than the humanities. And they were asking, does this really work within the humanities? And I said, yes. That's something I'm really interested in talking about, because there are some aspects of the humanities that certain tools really support, and there are other aspects that you need different tools for. So, for example, I teach both language and literature. There are some very concrete tasks that my students need to accomplish with respect to the English language: grammar, syntax, sentence structure, parts of speech, all those kinds of things. I now have a tool whereby they can engage in something called sentence diagramming. It's a very old-fashioned way of teaching grammar, but I've always had to teach that with pencil and paper because it actually involves drawing a diagram and kind of graphically representing the syntax of a sentence. Thanks to Articulate and the kind of interactivity of PowerPoint, I can now get them to do this diagramming online. And furthermore, I can get the result. I can find out whether they accomplished it correctly or not. So ultimately, that's going to save me time rather than having to go through everybody's kind of paper and pencil version of this. But that's one of those very concrete aspects of the humanities that this kind of teaching really promotes. But other things where we're talking about literature and the complexities of the human experience, there are other tools, the online lectures, the discussion forums, that really support that side of things. I've been struck by how positively students have responded to this form of teaching. It seems students are at home with it. They are delighted with it. They love the fact that they can go back and revisit the lectures. One of the reasons for my lectures particularly that most of the students didn't want a video format was because they want to navigate their way through the lecture as it suits them. So they don't like having to sit through and scroll through a timeline to find where they're going. They like a PowerPoint with an audio that they can just stop me from talking and move on to slide 27 as they see fit, because they're going to come back to that again and again. And then, as one lecturer I heard put it, I thought this was a brilliant phrase. He said, and then as the exam approaches, they can binge on the whole box set in the weeks coming up to the exam, So it just gives them so much flexibility, and I would never go back to teaching the way I used to. So the whole approach of flipping the classroom, blended learning, using the virtual learning environment, it's completely transformed the way my lectures work. I now, as I've said before, I wouldn't go back to the old way of teaching, both for what it's done for me as a teacher, but also the support it's given our students. And I have to say I'm very lucky in the fact that I work within St. Mary's University College, which has supported me every step of the way and has decided that this is the path we want to go down. And my colleagues have supported all the events that have been going on in the college, saying, look, how are we going to develop this style of learning? And as I say, we'll be rolling out a new component of this within the liberal arts degree soon, which I think will both improve our teaching, but also improve the general environment of support that we try to provide for students here. I think going through all these tools and strategies has clarified for me where it works best, where it perhaps doesn't work, and I'm now able to plan much more clearly where this is going to fit in my teaching in the future. It'll definitely stay as a key component to my lecturing in English literature, but I've also discovered that for other aspects, particularly for our liberal arts degree, there are parts of that course that this is going to suit very well. Again, things to do with communication skills, development with student writing. So I'm already planning a whole other set of online lessons and blended learning kind of sequences that are going to support those students. I also ran a sort of mini conference within the college focused on these kinds of issues, and so my colleagues came to that, and right away I had colleagues coming in my door saying, right, how do you get started with this kind of thing? The really useful thing about the blended learning toolkit is that I think it's going to save people a lot of the time that I didn't waste it, but I mean I went up a lot of dead ends not realizing where they were leading. The blended learning toolkit gets you to think probably more strategically about your audience, who your students are, what your purposes are, what your structure is going to be, and then it introduces you to this wide range of tools and strategies and says, look, try to think clearly about which one of these you want to incorporate. So I would highly recommend that people actually go through page by page of the blended learning toolkit. It asks you questions. I mean, basic things. I remember filling it out. It was asking about, characterize your students for me. Who are they? Where are they coming from? And immediately I realized I've got, 2 or 3 different types of student that I'm trying to aim towards. And the toolkit really helped me think through that clearly. So I think, the more this develops and the more colleagues keep coming through my door saying, look, can you give me some support? I've got people now here who have taken away my strategy for using these kind of audio-based PowerPoints. They're using it for language teaching in the college now. But I just think, the further this goes on, the more we will be saving people time because they won't be trying tools and strategies that maybe don't suit the actual subjects and disciplines that they're working in.